You're listening to the Arts in Isolation
Hello,
podcast,
this is Juan
brought to
Lara,
you by
Cultural
Asia
Manager
House.
at Asia House. So this is our last episode of the first season of Arts in Isolation podcasts, an initiative shared with the Barakat Trust and that counts with the support of the Al-Tajir Trust and the Juan Trust for Culture. We'll take a pause during summer to work on the next season and of course on more exciting content that will be announced very soon. So today's topic is part of an extremely lively debate at the moment. Many of you have seen recently in the news the presence of Hagia Sophia, the building that was once the Christian church of the Holy Wisdom in Constantinople, modern Istanbul. Later converted into a mosque by Mehmed II and made a secular museum in the 20th century by Atatürk. Hagia Sophia has filled headlines because the Turkish government has announced its transformation again into a mosque a few days ago. An interesting aspect is that given the secular characteristic of the building, this condition has prevented any acoustic performance inside it. But today we have here with us Professor Bissera Pentcheva to help us understand the special quality of this building as a musical and visual instrument. Bissera Pentcheva is Professor of Classics at Stanford University and has done innovative work on phenomenological aspects of Hagia Sophia, placing the attention on its changing appearance and architectural space, such as light and sound. I'm very pleased to have you here, Bissera. Welcome. And as we were saying before, there has been a plea to transform the museum back into a mosque. Could you tell us a little bit more about this move and the political scenario that surrounds it? Why is this happening now? And can you give us a bit of history of the monument to better understand why it's so relevant to mankind?
Thank you, Juan de Lara. It's an honor for me to be part of this program. This is a tough question, especially to answer in a very short response. Hagia Sophia is one of the most astounding medieval monuments that has survived over 1,500 years. And what it shows is the largest domed interior in the Mediterranean until the Renaissance changes to some medieval buildings like Old St. Peter's, that with the reconstruction of Bramante and Michelangelo acquired the tallest dome in the Mediterranean. But before that period, Hagia Sophia was this mesmerizing interior of over 150 cubic meters of interior space and a dome that rises over 50 meters above the floor. The building marked the reign of Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, which is the period of maximum expanse of this empire that reached all the way to Spain and regarded the Mediterranean as an eternal sea. Because the cathedral burned down in a revolt against the emperor in 532, he put all his resources and built in 5 years and a couple of months and completed this mesmerizing building. So it's a feat in terms of the amount of time it took to rebuild, and it is absolutely amazing when it comes to the architecture. Now, the building became the identity symbol of the empire. It was in the capital, and its interior decor latched on this mythopoetic power of architecture. It conjured up the image of water, and it was an empire of water. Byzantium's power, to a great extent, was its navy. And it is through its navy that basically Justinian controlled the Mediterranean. He would send his ships in to fight the Ostrogoths, for instance, and then the Visigoths. So it was a very important symbol that established Constantinople in its moment. It revealed the moment of maturity of Constantinople. And the building manifested or enacted Genesis as the place where creation started. And this was a very powerful way to combat the much stronger claims of the other power centers. Holy Land, the place where Christ was born and walked on earth, Rome with Peter and Paul, Alexandria with Saint Mark, and Antioch with Paul. So Constantinople lacked any apostolic claims, and it also lacked the presence of Christ. Placing itself as a period before that, reaching to this primordial antiquity, was very powerful. So this is one of the reasons why this building became so closely entwined with Byzantine power. When the city of Constantinople was conquered by Mehmed Fatih in 1453, that structure, because of its enormous historical power and political significance, was immediately transformed into a mosque, but with very limited intervention. Mehmet didn't make big changes in the space. The mosaics were not covered, these are Middle Byzantine mosaics, but it was the Friday Mosque for 2 decades before a Friday Mosque was created in Constantinople. And what we see as very powerful symbol, this space is a very powerful symbol, is whenever the Ottoman Empire was conquering in advance, successful, that building was taken care of with very little intervention in it. The moment the Ottoman Empire started to enter decline, that's when we see tremendous changes in the space. And this is the moment in which sultanic power starts to gravitate around this building and the sultanic tomb starts to appear. This is the second half of the 16th century, which is after the age of Suleiman the Great. The previous sultans made their own magnificent mosques, and Suleiman is famous for Sinan building the Suleimani, for instance, and that's where their tombs were. But as I said, as decline settled in, this building started to be manipulated to express more clearly sultanic power, and this is also the moment, the second half of the 16th century, when the mosaics were whitewashed. In the 19th century, when Abdul Mejid comes to the throne, among his first policy is modernization and secularization. This is the sultan that invites Western engineers and restorers to come and reinforce the building because it's in a seismic zone. And this is the moment in which the knowledge of the mosaics becomes revealed to the Western world. They, of course, covered, but Abdul Mejid was very sensitive to the importance of this discovery and, in general, the importance of the monument. Ataturk, after the establishment of the Turkish Republic in 1923, already presents plans to transform this building, to take it away from the Ottoman memory and use it as a symbol of secularism, pursuit of knowledge, and science. And it takes a decade for this conversion from a mosque to a museum to take place. But when it takes place, these are the ideas that we see in the press as well as in the document with which the Ministry of Education speaks about the conversion. So it becomes, they call it an institution of knowledge. That's how they establish it. And a place where it needs to be studied for its historical value without privileging Byzantine versus Ottoman. So putting it into a neutral space was very important. What we see currently in Istanbul and in Turkey is a desire once again for this building to be co-opted for political gains, and a desire to put to the foreground the Islamic base of Erdogan. This is, in a sense, the motivation behind the desire for changes. And I think it's very important for the West to understand this is not Turkey. This is a part of Turkey, but there is also a democratic voice within this country that does not support these changes, for whom the changes that Erdogan is introducing are cutting away the foundation of the modern secular Turkish Republic. So I think we need to be very careful in the way we approach this phenomenon and not try to throw the baby with the bathwater, in a sense, that this is not the whole of Turkey. And maybe we should also recognize that what Erdogan is doing is what the moments of decline of the Ottoman power had done. So if anything, it's a sign of decline.
I think this introduction is perfect to place our audience in the setting. You have studied the building thoroughly, and particularly the sensorial aspects. What did you find out?
I approached the building from what I felt at the time, a less political angle. I'm a scholar known for my interest in phenomenology, that there is temporality to medieval art, and this temporality is manifested in the way material surfaces change their appearance, and then these chameleonic transformations become markers of the presence of the spirit. Within Christian spirituality, this is a very important aspect, and we do have the texts that discuss exactly this moment of the spirit entering matter and transforming it into something that is incandescent. Just to give one example so that the listeners know that I'm not talking off the top of my head. When John Climacus speaks about prayer, And John Climacus writes in the 7th century, and his text, The Heavenly Ladder, is one of the most widely read texts throughout the Middle Ages and later. And it's read both East and West. It's not just Eastern Orthodox spirituality. And he speaks to a monastic community how to gain perfection, how to take, well, let's say not so much perfection, but how to purify oneself through a life of monastic practice. And it's given in the form of a ladder with rungs, and you ascend on these rungs. And he says not everyone is able to ascend to the top. And it's more frequent that even some people will never be able to ascend and they fall at some point on that ladder. But it's important to strive. And so within this text, there is a segment. One of the rungs is about prayer. And he says, when one prays truly with a pricked conscience, with compunction, then they become radiant, incandescent. And in a sense, sin burns with this incandescence. And why I say that? Because to explain what it means to attune to the divine, he explains it as a phenomenon of brightness. And so light and brightness are very important. So for a scholar to enter the medieval realm with this desire to start to uncover this phenomenon of brightness that become markers of divine presence is very important. And this building just offers an incredible field for this study because it has marble revetments on the walls and polished marble floors and then gold mosaics. It is set, this is an environment of a material flux that is set to activate the moment there is changing diurnal light in that space. And since we know that the building was mainly used for orthros and hesperinos, for matins and for vespers. These are the moments of change of light in the space. And I say this because these are the moments when the space is photogenic, when all these changes from what is dormant to what is incandescent happen, and they're very effective for the gaze of the beholder in the space. I was given special permission when I was working there in 2010 to enter the building at sunrise. And to see this change was transformative for me, that the surfaces are very chameleonic and they take on appearance that is not their true nature. So for instance, the marble revetments become rivers of gold. They take on the appearance of the gold mosaic. And I had never thought about liquescence, so this kind of liquid quality of marble that is so similar to melted metal before I actually saw that space. And I think for a medieval beholder, this is a given because they already have lifelong exposure to these changes. But for a modern scholar to transcend looking at a monument based on static photographs and texts, it's a big transition. And I think we need more of this experience, what really changes our perception with experience. And so this transformative experience then created in me a sensitivity to the texts that are exegesis of the liturgy that draw attention to experience. And one of these great names, this is the Maximus the Confessor. What he writes is that there are two types of knowledge. He says, one is according to which we arrange our daily life. It's a knowledge that is connected to language, to meaning, to semantics. And he says there is another knowledge with which we reach to the divine, and that's experience. And so he puts Pira, experience, as the springboard to this interaction with the metaphysical. And so it gave me a chance as a scholar to open a new page within scholarship in which is we need to value the effect, the sensorial effect of a space, because it carries within it not only revelation about how the metaphysical presence is felt and experienced, but it also carries the political ideas that are not just statements, they are phenomena. And later on in this program, we are going to play for you an example of this, of how acoustics, the acoustics of the space, creates temporal phenomena that manifest power. And power is experienced by the body, by this enveloping sound. And so I would say to the very end of this question about how I as a scholar approach this interior, it led me not only to study phenomenology and the chameleonic glitter and incandescence of the surface of gold and marble, but eventually it led me from the visual to the acoustic, because the space not only conjures the image of water and the sea and Genesis, but it conjures it with the acoustics of water, infinite sound, lapping sound that envelops the faithful in the space. And that allowed me for a collaboration with Stanford Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics, where I started working with Jonathan Abel, who is an electric engineer, and I gathered acoustic data out of which he then extracted the impulse response of the space. So we had a model, an acoustic model, the acoustic signature of the space that we can then imprint on live sound. And for the past 10 years, we have been working on perfecting this system and allowing some of the music that was created for Hagia Sophia that has not been performed for the past 500 years to be heard again. And it is very powerful experience for contemporary audiences because it is built on estrangement. It is a sound that we are not used to listen. It is over a 10 seconds reverberation time, and it allows us to enter for the minutes or the time we listen to this sound to a different sensorial environment and approach, in a sense, the Middle Ages from as a corporeal experience that is beyond semantics and beyond language.
So I believe that you have prepared 2 musical extracts. Could you tell us a little bit more about them, please?
So what you're going to listen to is music that is composed for the Feast of the Elevation of the Cross. This feast has its beginnings in Jerusalem, and it is connected to the memory of Helena and the role of Constantine, the Emperor Constantine, in transforming the Roman Empire with Christianity, that he made Christianity a state religion. And in the second half of his rule, he worked assiduously into making Jerusalem have the imperial presence of Christianity. So he started the construction of the Basilica of the Holy, at the grounds of the Holy Sepulchre. But in the 7th century, that major changes in the empire, and the Emperor Heraclius is engaged in decades of war with the Sasanian Empire, and they managed to reconquer Jerusalem, and with it to bring the relics of the cross, initially just for a procession, and then the relics are brought back to Jerusalem. But because the city is reconquered by the Sasanians, and then it takes a series of wars and negotiations until the relics are returned, in 628, Heraclius decides to move the relics for safekeeping in Constantinople. That's the moment when this feast becomes a feast with anchoring in Constantinople. The music that is created for that feast, that is designed for that space. And it is designed in 2 interfaces, singing outside in the open air and singing inside that space. And so what you're going to hear is one of these 2 hymns, a Troparion and a Kontakion, which are specifically designed for the feast in Constantinople. And what we hear in terms of text of what they sing, that is the early foundation of the ideology of war of religion. So Christianity is presented here. In other words, violence against the non-Christian enemy is justified. And this is a very powerful, in a sense, language that we had not seen since the time of Constantine. The Christian church worked strenuously to suppress those aspects of kind of proto-nationalism that were present in the rhetoric of Constantine. And they resurface again with Heraclius. So it's really significant. Our collaboration between the Art History Department at Stanford and the Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustic with Jonathan Abel, these 2 parties, we invited a third one very early in our program, already in 2011, and that's Capella Romana, the foremost a cappella choir in North America. And with them, with this collaboration of now a decade, we decided in 2016 together that we will select a repertoire for a concert that has live imprinting of Hagia Sophia acoustics with music that is designed specifically for the structure that we see today. And Alexander Lingus, who is the artistic director of Capella Romana, suggested let's do the Feast of the Elevation of the Cross, which has these Heraclean roots, and it has music that we could say for sure was designed for that space. And the concert was magnificent. It was a great success, and afterwards, both Capella Romana and Icons of Sound, our collaboration, we worked to produce CDs. They now exist. They're distributed by Naxos. They are on Amazon. You can listen to that music. The energy that propagates in the space as the human voice starts to exhale its energy in the space. It exhales high and low frequencies, but the way they propagate in the space is different. The cupola surface shows a concentration of some of these high frequency bright sound, and they have short wavelengths, and they reflect and refract in that surface, and some of this energy rains down on the congregation below. So it is that effect that is mobilized by the melodic contour of the troparion and the kontakion, and it is mobilized with particular words. So anyways, what we see there, the word in the troparion, where they target the acoustics of the dome, the attack on the dome with bright sound, is the word for blessing. May you bless. They ask divinity to bless. The moment they sing that, these are the highest pitches that are sung in the space. In other words, they build on this explosion. And once the explosion happens, subliminally, the people in that space could perceive divine presence, not as a figure of form, but as this bright sound raining from the dome. Having spoken about this phenomenon, now you can listen to it and you can recognize if it's the troparion we are listening, you'll hear it very early on. And if you're listening to the kontakion, you'll hear it at the end, where what they're singing is, may they have this divine power as a weapon of victory against the enemies.
Wonderful. So let's listen first to the troparion from the festivity of the elevation of the cross. And now we listen to the kontakion from the same liturgy. say, Bissera, that these pieces are quite powerful. It is surprising to think that the building itself acted as an instrument, almost like the box of a guitar, right? And I wonder, the Muslim benefited from these acoustic phenomena.
This is one aspect that has always attracted me to Islamic art. Better knowledge and better discussion within Western literature on the acoustic effects of Quranic reading and the way the voice is modulated, the way breath is related to a Quranic line from the surah. And this is the aspect that I found the least penetrable for a Western scholar. It is very much in the control of the religious community, the established qarayat, ways of reading the Quran. So I cannot give an exhaustive answer that I wish I could, but what I could say is the building is extremely reverberant, so it will transform the human voice into emanation. The fact that both Christianity and Islam are religions of the book means that the faithful are in control of a vast body of text that they know very well. So the building as the instrument of the human voice, what it adds with its reverberation is this metaphysical aspect to it. That is no longer human speech we are hearing. Now, having said that, we also have evidence that it was considered problematic indirectly, and the evidence is Suleimani. When Sinan, deeply affected by the architectural form of Hagia Sophia, creates the language of Ottoman power as these cascading domes, and they become the identity feature of Ottoman art, which separates itself from what is its predecessors, be it, and I'll go very back in time, Umayyads, Abbasids, Fatimids, Mamluks, and then its immediate contemporaries, Safavids and Mughals. Ottomans have their own architectural vocabulary, and that's Sinan. And the building of Hagia Sophia is at the core of this architectural vocabulary. When he built Suleimani, he reduces the volume of the building, which already will reduce the reverberation. So in other words, there are certain steps he takes that minimize the effect of reverberation. This is one, reducing the size. The second is reducing certain frequencies within that space, canceling them out. And this is discussed in the scholarship by Nina Ergin on the acoustic vessels that were in the tympana of Suleimani, which means that without having the texts that speak about these changes, it is clear by the fabric of the Suleimanian mosque that Sinan is trying to arrive at a space that is more rational, where there is intelligibility of speech. So this is clearly a direction in which Quranic readings are taking place. And it means that the medieval building of Hagia Sophia was too much of this emanation, too much of this acousmetra, bodiless voice. And this aspect of oral clarity is connected with visual or optical clarity because light within Suleimani comes from the ground level. There is direct sunlight that enters that space, and it's very significant because in Hagia Sophia, light comes from very high up. It's at the level of the golden mosaic after you had passed the marble revetment. So the space really strikes you as this divine presence, that it's high up. It is beyond the realm of matter of the body, and these are the worshippers that are at the lower levels of that space, marble / body, divinity / gold mosaics. This is how it works there. And with Sinan, that light is brought lower down, and so to me it's part and parcel of this early modern aspect to which Ottoman culture participates, which is part of the Mediterranean discourse of what we see in Renaissance Italy. So there are these aspects that are very important.
So can we compare, for example, the acoustics of these buildings we're discussing with other mosques like the one in Cordoba or Damascus?
What I could say when I compare the acoustics of Hagia Sophia to the mosque at Damascus or the mosque at Cordoba, that despite the fact that the mosque at Damascus is probably with larger footprint, because it is absolutely tremendous space, and we could hear it in the praise poetry, the madih that is created for that space, that they were very aware that in terms of square footage, they have surpassed Hagia Sophia. But it doesn't have height, and also the interior doesn't have stone boats. There is, we don't know exactly how the central section, which eventually will be called the Maksura, was treated, if there was a dome there or not. But the suggestion from the praise poetry is that there is teak wood. In other words, it will absorb sound, so it will not create the same effects of brilliance that we had seen in Hagia Sophia, and the interior will be much less reverberant, which will mean that the relationship to sound is different. It will also not be enveloping sound in that space. There is something about the way of creating an inner core. Hagia Sophia has a central stage that is then surrounded by colonnades and the aisles and the galleries, which means that sound will project, it will reach the outer limits of the space, reflect and come back to that center. So the center is continuously replenishing. When you have a basilica shoebox, that effect doesn't happen. And this is how, in a sense, the longitudinal mosque at Damascus would have worked. And it would have been very similar at the mosque at Cordoba. So there will be much less reverberant. And also they will probably suffer from lack of audibility, because the sound of the sound that will come from the mihrab, as opposed to the sound that each worshipper is making within the space where they are kneeling and praying. So in other words, you have less privileging of elite voice in the space. What will be the voice of the elite choir singing from the ambo of Hagia Sophia in a space like the mosque at Damascus or the mosque at Cordoba. And I would think that there will be very similar effects in the great mosque at Samarra, because there most likely the ceiling was wood. Yes, it's an enormous space, but it is an enormous space that will not be creating enveloping sound.
Such interesting phenomena. I think you have done an amazing job trying to bring back those aspects of the building that sometimes people forget. And because I'm aware that we are running out of time, I just wanted to ask you about how do you think, given the current circumstances, we can better negotiate our historical relationship with the monument?
I have two distinct realms where these ideas are gathering. The first one is what this building was in 2010. The listener might wonder, why are we gathering acoustic responses of the space? The building is there. Why don't we just bring singers to it? And the answer in 2010 is pretty much the answer since 1934, when the building was transformed from a mosque to a museum, and its jurisdiction was transferred from the Vakaf for Pious Buildings to the Ministry of Education, which eventually became renamed as the Ministry of Culture. And the building became a secular site with absolute ban on any performance of the human voice. This ban has been changing when it comes to the Islamic side, because already in 1980, Quranic prayer was allowed in the Western Gallery. And then these readings, I think, had been happening in 2016 and later on until we arrive at May of 2020, where there was a big show of Erdogan's mobilizing his Islamic base. So our project at the beginning in 2010 was in direct response to certain limits as to where scholarship could go. We could not bring a choir to sing. We could not bring a singer to sing in that space, because they will be expelled immediately from the interior. So with our resourcefulness, we relied on what modern technology could give us, so that we could still experiment with what the acoustics of this space is and create the conditions in which singers could interact with this space without infringing on Atatürk's memory and the pillars of the Turkish Republic of secularization and modernization. In fact, it was, I would say, amplifying the same goal. We have digital technology. There are things we could do with digital technology that will still allow us to study this monument without troubling its secular status. Now, the problem with the current situation and the problem with this reactionary approach of Erdogan is what is going to be the husbandry of the building. The building for the much more than the past decade, had not received any serious study of its structural solidity. It's in seismic zone and its situation is very precarious. Being under the control of the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Culture and being part in the same jurisdiction with the Archaeological Museum and Topkapi was pretty significant because such programs could have a lot of say applying for international funding for restoration activities. Unfortunately, in the past 10 years, none of these restoration activities, and we had so much scaffolding built in that space and moved around, was to reinforce the building structure, which means that this building is very vulnerable to earthquakes. If there is no concentrated attention on this aspect, we stand in front of a disaster. If the building falls, what? We're going to create our authentic replica of it when we have a building that is standing. So I would say it is being under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Culture is a platform on which such a program could be promoted. And that's where the problem about the status of this building as a UNESCO monument is significantly endangered. And as I said, I say that with a clear recognition that we are speaking about the modern Republic of Turkey, where there are different voices. And so I would like to distinguish between what Erdogan is trying to do and what are democratic voices within Turkey and within Istanbul, for that matter, because it's a democratically elected mayor, Imamoglu, and what his interviews are not in support of that policy. He says there are a lot of other problems right now in the country and in Istanbul, and Hagia Sophia is not our problem. It is not this moment to discuss this question. There are problems with the economy, problems with how to control COVID-19. This is where the attention should be falling right now, instead of using a historical moment for political gains.
Certainly, the safekeeping of the monument is something we all need to look after. And Bissera, it has been wonderful getting this deep insight into the artistic values that we usually don't study on Earth, but that definitely tells us a lot about our past, our history, and somehow helps us to entangle the current situations and to visualize the future. So I want to thank you for sharing your time with us. I hope that once all this situation is over, you are able to come to London and join us at Asia House for a Converging Paths event.
Thank you, Juan. It has been a pleasure. And I greatly value the opportunity this interview has given us to share some of this historical memory with a larger audience.
Yes, and I think the larger audience would hardly ever have the chance to have such a beautiful exhibition of a topic like this. So like every Wednesday, I want to thank our listeners for tuning in our podcast, and just to say that we are going to take a break during summer. We're going to be preparing our next season, but we're also going to come out with new content to share with you. So please stay tuned, check out our website, subscribe to our newsletter, and look forward to seeing you all back in September. Until then, take care and stay safe.
You were listening to the Arts in Isolation podcast, brought to you by Asia House. For more information, please visit our website, asiahousearts.org.